Cultural violence in media. That's a big blanket statement, but what does it mean? Media influences everyone. Everyone from every part of the world is influenced by the media in some way, shape, or form. Movies, music, games, dance, paintings, podcasts, social media, whatever you can think of. Media has the power to change beliefs, attitudes, and even personalities. This goes way farther than you may think. I am personally very influenced by media. Movies, games, and music specifically. As a kid, I was a huge Spider-Man fan, but no matter how old I got, I never stopped loving this character. I, along with many others, grew attached to the character of Peter Parker. It wasn't because he swung on webs, did cool flips, or beat up supervillains. Any superhero can do that. Maybe save for the swing on webs part. No. Spider-Man is relatable because he's just a kid with problems like the rest of us. He barely gets by on the rent, he's got girl trouble, been there, has a mean and condescending boss, an old sickly aunt, and his role as Spider-Man only seems to heighten these problems. He can never get credit for his good deeds because of the whole secret identity thing, and most people he saves will never know who's under the mask. Spider-Man could be black for all they know.
Spider-Man, he was black and you never knew.
This is obviously foreshadowing for later, but I promise I'm getting to my point. You know what really makes Spider-Man special though? No matter how many times he gets knocked down, loses someone he loves, loses his job, no matter how low his life gets, he always gets back up. He always chooses to be Spider-Man because even though leaving the costume behind would probably make his life infinitely easier, with great power...
Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
Okay, I just spent 2 minutes talking about Spider-Man in a Peace and Justice essay. I know what you're thinking. For the love of God, get to the point. Look, most people are familiar with Spider-Man, and it's no secret why people love this character so much, so I'm not breaking any new ground here, but this is an important framework for how Spider-Man influenced me personally. When I make decisions in life, especially ones that determine who I may be as a person, I often ask myself, what would Peter Parker do? Would Spider-Man do this? Would Spider-Man give up? And I'm fully aware that sounds like the nerdiest shit in the world, and that's because it kind of is. But as stupid as it sounds, this is how I and a lot of other people in the world subconsciously make decisions. As people, we are always chasing the ideal person we want to be. Oftentimes, we model ourselves after the characters we see in media. While the less thoughtful person would call that nerdy, I don't see it that way. Many people question how someone can be so unabashedly passionate about characters in media, like Luke Skywalker, Nathan Drake, Taylor Swift. I don't ever question it. Media has deep roots in our culture and behavior as human beings. I'm not a T-Swift fan though. Characters like Spider-Man are a beacon of hope and the ideal person, someone with a great heart. However, as much as I love Spider-Man, and believe me, I love Spider-Man, there was always a disconnect. While the character really spoke to me, I never felt like I, Brandon Morris, was being represented. Peter Parker didn't look, talk, or really act like me or my family at all. Of course, the little kid version of me couldn't care less about this, but the older I grew, the more I thought about it. You know how I said that Spider-Man is the ideal person to model yourself after? Well, have you ever noticed that every other character like this looks exactly like Spider-Man? White, male, tall, handsome. What's that all about? How come American media's ideal person is always a white male with similar features? Whether you know it or not, this is cultural violence, so let's get into it. Obviously, there are way more pronounced examples of cultural violence in the media historically than the bigger picture I'm getting at here. One of my favorite movies, King Kong from 1933, also happens to be one of the most racist and sexist films I've ever seen. All of the main characters are white and all of the tribal characters are black. The main female lead is constantly berated by her male supporters. We've already discussed how media can influence your thoughts, so with that in mind, think about how the impact of scenes like the ones I just showed you can have. How would a film like this influence your thoughts about black people and women, especially if this was your only representation at the time? This brings me to typecasting. Minority and gender roles in film especially are usually pigeonholed into racist and sexist archetypes. Don't believe me? Here's my black bingo sheet for Hollywood. Black character in a movie that dies first. Black character serving as a loudmouth comic relief. Black character mentions they are black. Black character is subservient to a white main character / white savior. Black characters portrayed as gangsters, black characters portrayed as slaves, black characters portrayed as subhuman, black characters using black slang, the list goes on. The wives are always portrayed as the trad wife, the idealistic American servant wife. Additionally, most female storylines in feature films typically revolve around their relationships with men. How come a female lead always has to be related to a man? How come a black character always has to have a story related to their blackness? White male characters are never held to this standard. Do you think Superman being white is relevant to his stories at all? Does Luke Skywalker need a woman to determine his value in the story? White men are the only ones that benefit from this systematic violence. By keeping white males the national brand of America, they secure their spots as the top dogs of capitalist America. It always comes back to capitalism, doesn't it? So we've looked at bad representation. We know what that looks like. But what does good representation look like?
Like, what's up, danger? Like, what's up, danger? Like, what's up, danger? Like, can't stop me now. Knocking at your door, and I don't really care.
These films are perfect examples of how to approach cultural representation appropriately. The Spider-Verse films are beacons of culture, not shying away from the characters' cultural identities in the slightest. However, it is not the entire identity of the product and still has a narrative that does not thematically depend on culture. This is important to uproot the racist conception that minority characters have to act a certain way and their films must entirely depend on the color of their skin. White characters are not like this. Why should other characters be? Tenet is a great example of this approach, a black James Bond-like main character who does not have any outward characteristics typically assigned to African Americans. He is simply his own fluid character, an important distinction from being whitewashed. Alien is a perfect example of the capable female protagonist that doesn't call attention to its main character in a demeaning way. Rather than the movie tell us that the main character is a strong female character, she simply is. The film isn't thematically dependent on Riley being a female, just like a male-led movie wouldn't be thematically dependent on masculinity. Well, most of the time. Calling attention to a strong female lead implies that this is somehow against the norm, which is culturally untrue and demeaning. Females are strong in many ways, and not always in the way that men are. For example, they can be mentally or emotionally stronger than men. In the media, females are often assigned typically male traits such as physical strength in order to make them appear stronger or on par with supporting male characters. While not always a bad thing, in some cases this perpetuates the narrative that females have to conform to male traits in order to be quote-unquote strong. This is culturally harmful and why films like Alien are important to uproot this stereotype. Dune 2 is a commentary on the white savior and how the white savior archetype can and will cause cultural harm in the media. The film is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go too much in depth there. Now, before I get to my thesis, I do want to say one important thing, which is that racial and gender-focused stories are still important. For example, Till, Men of Honor, New Jack City. I guess that's not really a good example, but yeah. Or even Get Out come to mind. This video is not meant to criticize movies that focus on these themes. They still have a profound and essential place in the media. My overall thesis is intended to state that we should not be exclusively limited to these types of stories. My solution is simply this. We need more films like the ones mentioned above. Dune 2, Spider-Verse, Tenet. And I need some water. Damn. Destroy the idea that minority roles have to conform to some arbitrary blueprint. Allow female roles to have the same fluidity. Dispose of the white savior and similar tropes. That is how cultural violence in the media can be solved. But that's just a theory.